Hello and welcome to today's webinar about domestic violence. This webinar and all others are brought to you by the Orientation to Ontario program in affiliation with the Refugee Assistance Program. Before I get into the topic itself, I just wanted to highlight to you that the Orientation to Ontario program, otherwise known as O2O, provides information and support to help new refugees as they are settling in Ontario. And it does this by offering workshops, webinars such as this one, and many other online and print resources. O2O is managed by Costi Immigrant Services and it's funded by the Government of Ontario. So let's begin with our topic, domestic violence and abuse, part 2. This is part 2 of a two-part series. In part 1, if you haven't heard that one yet, we talked about domestic violence and the different types of violence that are out there. We focused on abuse against women and elder abuse, and we talked about the consequences of this abuse and where to get help. In part 2, which is today's webinar, we are going to talk about child abuse. So we are going to focus more on abuse against children. And we are also going to, again, cover what the consequences of that abuse are and where and how to get help for that. So let's begin. Child abuse is when a parent or a caregiver causes harm to a child, and it's a very simple definition. Examples of child abuse include neglect, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical, sexual, and exploitation of children. So it's quite a lengthy list of what we consider to be abuse against children. Child abuse causes both physical and psychological injury, and it can have very lasting effects. So it's an important issue for us to address. So in Canada, parents are allowed to use physical force to discipline their children, but this force has to be reasonable. And we often call this discipline spanking. That's a term you will hear here in Canada. Spanking is not abuse. It's not considered abuse because it's supposed to be a correct way for parents or caregivers to correct children's behavior. But spanking cannot be done in anger. It should not be done with any strong physical force that goes beyond a light spank. And children experts and many people in Canada feel that parents should not use any kind of physical discipline. They shouldn't be spanking their children at all, and instead should use other forms of discipline for their children. So today, some parents who used to be spanked by their own parents perhaps could be even abusing their children, not realizing that that form of force is no longer acceptable. There are many restrictions on spanking, so let's go through some of them now. Any physical force that goes beyond spanking is considered against the law here in Canada. So spanking should be corrective, not a punishment. You cannot spank children who have any kind of disabilities that affect their behavior. You cannot spank children who are under the age of 2 or over the age of 12. You should never use an object to spank a child, such as a belt or a hairbrush or a wooden spoon. You cannot hit the child on the head or in the genital area. These are very sensitive areas of the body. And you cannot do anything degrading or inhumane, such as spanking your children in public or removing their clothing to make them embarrassed. This is considered abusive. Teenagers can also be victims of physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect. The spanking law does not permit any form of physical discipline against the teenagers. While young people, they could consent to sexual activity at the age of 16 here in Canada, there is an exception when the sexual partner is in a position of authority, such as a teacher or a family friend or even a relative. And even when teenagers are big enough and strong enough to defend themselves against violence, they are still vulnerable to the abuse by adult family members and other authority figures. So let's look at the consequences of this type of abuse in our families. Domestic violence is a problem in Canada as it is all over the world. All Canadians have to do a better job of dealing with domestic violence and preventing it from happening in the first place. The same laws that apply to all of society apply to family members too. So just because this occurs within the family does not mean that it is acceptable or that it is legal. Assaulting a stranger and assaulting a family member is the same crime according to the Criminal Code of Canada. So people in Canada do not think that violence in the home is a family matter. It's not a family matter, it's a community matter. So people have the civic responsibility to call the police if they see or hear any kind of evidence of violence against family members, especially children. The police will visit the home. They'll make sure that everybody is safe. They may arrest the person who committed the violence or the act of abuse. And victims of family violence are encouraged to report their abuse to the police and to get help from community organizations and services, because there's a lot of help available out there. Domestic violence is a little bit more complicated than violence against non-family members because it involves power, control, and inequality in relationships. Family members rely on each other, they love each other, and victims often love their abusers, and they don't want them to be hurt or punished. So there are special programs to help family members who want to deal with the problem and solve it for their own family. There are many organizations that help victims of family violence. They're prepared to help the victim and the children to leave the home if that's necessary. They may also help the family to resolve the stress or the conflict that caused the violence in the first place. So let me talk a little bit about Children's Aid Society. In Ontario, the law requires all adults to report suspicions of child abuse, and this includes neglect or endangerment, and you should report this to your local Children's Aid Society with the acronym CAS. The Children's Aid Society must investigate every report that they receive. So they'll visit the home, they will assess the situation, they'll speak to all the family members, and then they will complete a report. If the Children's Aid Society finds that the children are, yes, indeed in danger, they can legally remove the children from the home for their own well-being, for their own safety. Children will be placed in a foster care just temporarily to help the family correct the situation. If necessary, the government can remove the children from the home permanently. And if the Children's Aid Society does remove a child from their home, this is called apprehension. And this is done simply because the children's well-being is more important than leaving them in the home. When you make a report to the Children's Aid Society, it is confidential. If the investigation shows that there was no abuse, there was a misunderstanding of some sort perhaps, the person who made the report will not be punished and they cannot be sued as long as the report was made in good faith. So if there are children who you feel may be in danger, it is your responsibility to report them. If it turns out that they were not in danger, that doesn't have any repercussions on you. So this is an important point to make out. So where to get help, how to get help. People that experience domestic violence may find it hard to seek help. Victims of intimate partner violence often keep their abuse a secret. They feel embarrassed maybe, or they're ashamed. They might fear for their own safety and that of their children, or depending on their immigration status, they may even fear of being deported. Perhaps they depend on the abuser for financial and emotional support. And victims often do blame themselves for provoking the abuser, or maybe they fear that other family members are going to blame them for the problem. Victims may also be afraid of what will happen if they seek help, or maybe they report the violence. But violence will continue if the victim does not seek help. They cannot fix this problem all by themselves. The perpetrators of domestic violence can also seek help to change their behavior. So there is help for both the victim and the person who is committing the violence in the first place. If you or any family member are in any sort of immediate danger, do not hesitate to call 911. Or if you are not in immediate danger, but you want to report something to the police, you can call the local police emergency number. If you or a family member needs any sort of help, you can call one of these phone numbers that you see listed here. The Assaulted Women's Helpline, the Kids Help phone, and this is for children and teens. The Good to Talk, this is for high school students, post-secondary students, and the Senior Safety Line for any seniors who are experiencing any sort of abuse. If you suspect or you've seen evidence of child abuse, neglect, or any kind of endangerment of children, you should report it directly to the Children's Aid Society. And you can find your local Children's Aid Society by visiting the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies website at www.oacas.org, or contact the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. The website there is given to you with the phone number 1-866-821-7770. You can also call 211 and ask for the local Children's Aid Society phone number. Sexual assault centers help victims or survivors of sexual assault, and they are there to give you help in terms of confidential counseling, if that's what you need. They have phone lines that are open 24 hours a day, and these centers can provide survivors and supporters with important information that you're going to need, such as how to seek medical help, maybe how to report the assault to the police, how to plan for your future safety, and dealing with any memories or flashbacks that could occur caused by the trauma that you've experienced. There are sexual assault centers in communities across Ontario. So to find the websites and the phone numbers, visit this particular website, www.sexualassaultsupport.ca/support, or call the Assaulted Women's Helpline at the phone number given there. Many communities also have emergency shelters for women and children who are in danger in their own home. So women who are in danger or experience domestic violence, they can seek shelter with their children at any one of these emergency shelters. They will also receive counseling, planning again for their future safety, and to find perhaps a new place to live. The locations of emergency shelters are kept secret to protect the victims. You must contact an agency or an organization in your community for help, and they will then direct you to the shelter. Shelter Safe helps women find a local shelter by listing the agencies that run these shelters, and here's the website, www.sheltersafe.ca/Ontario. Women can also call the Assaulted Women's Helpline for information about emergency shelters that are available. Sometimes families can reduce the violence in their own home with counseling and intervention programs. An intervention program helps the victims or the survivors with immediate safety and then they help them work towards ending the cycle of violence in their family. Family members who have experienced any kind of violence or abuse should get counseling. Many community agencies offer intervention programs for men who commit domestic violence. And these programs focus on education, coping with stress, recognizing abusive behavior, and managing anger and emotions. Most of the intervention programs are mandatory, which means that the court may order an abusive family member to attend. However, some of these programs also accept voluntary participants who want to change their own behavior, and violent members can also seek counseling. So if you are someone who is in any kind of immediate danger, as I've already mentioned, call 911. Don't hesitate to call 911. To report abuse of adults, call your local police non-emergency line. To report the abuse of children, call your local Children's Aid Society. For information on counseling, shelters, Children's Aid Societies, intervention programs, and many other supports that are available in your community, you can call 211 or visit the 211ontario.ca website. Thank you very much for attending part 2 of domestic violence.